Okay, today we're going to begin a tutorial that's a little more advanced in Inventor, and what we're going to do is we're going to start playing with and editing and making our own textures and materials. This is where you can really create an extra element of creativity to your design, as well as tailoring it to something you specifically like, instead of just always having clay or generic wood or other types of textures. So the first thing I'm going to use is this skateboard as an example, and the first thing we're going to do is just look at a basic texture, how to edit qualities about the texture, and what each component is in the material or appearance dialog. Now, since we're doing all of this in a part file, I'm only going to play with the appearances, which is the same thing as material, but it's surface based. So if you want to change a material, the same rules apply, you just need a different assembly. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add grip tape to the top of the skateboard, which is just basic sandpaper. So we're going to go to our appearance dialog box, since we have a generic appearance everywhere, and we're going to hunt through here for materials that have some kind of pattern to them that looks like sandpaper. So if I scroll down to some of the carpets, like let's say, where was our medium pile? So you may scroll down to, let's see if we have some carpet or something similar to that, to an exposed aggregate, or like what I have here is a medium pile dark gray. So once you find it, whatever your pattern what you want it to look like, you're going to drag it into the materials box. And if you drag in the wrong one, you can always right click and delete it. But for now, I'm going to do this medium pile gray. If you double click, once you found these are all the patterns or surfaces that are going to be inside my file, and I can delete any that I don't want, like these blue ones and some of these that I wasn't using. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on my appearance. When you double click on your appearance, you're going to get a dialog box like this. Now this is medium pile dark gray, which is a type of carpet. But the good thing about this carpet is that we can edit it to make it look like grip tape. It's pretty close to it. We just need to make a few changes. So before we go too far, let's take a look at what this is. Well, when you open the appearance editor, or the material editor for that matter, it opens the existing file. And you can change attributes to that file, or what it looks like, by changing this little preview box right here. We can go to a sphere, we can look at a plane, right? We can look at a vase. We can see how this thing textures on different surfaces, right? Even if it's a pool of liquid, we can make it look like a carpeted pool of liquid, which is silly, but for now we'll just stick with a cube. If you have curved surfaces, pick something with a curve, so on and so forth. So the basic appearance box has your name of your material, what it is as a description, and keywords that you could search to find it. Within the appearance editor and materials are made up of several files and bits of information, right? So we have information, which is our generic stuff that we saw. We have generic information, which tells us the color value for what the carpet is. It also links us to an image, right? If you click on that image right there, you'll get another dialog box. This dialog box is all about the specific image and how it gets mapped back to a surface. Within there, you've got an image fade. We can change it from a light color to a dark color. We can add glossiness to make it shiny or less shiny. And we can also make highlights metallic or non-metallic. So this may change depending on if you're doing a chrome looking car on your paint with a material in it, or so on and so forth. This is just an image. It doesn't have any texture. It just is a flat image that looks like it has texture. The next couple levels we have are reflectivity. We can turn on reflectivity, make things shiny. Notice how as I change the direct and the location of the shading and lighting, right, the corners, the surfaces of the object become shiny or darker. We can make it transparent, right? If this material were glass, we can make it see-through, more ghost-like. We can also fade an image in and out. You could come back here and select another image, which we'll get to in a little bit, but we're just going to talk about these toolbars. We have cutouts, right? This is where if you want to make part of your image look like it's disappeared, you can cut out portions of it. There's even portions for self-illumination, so you could turn on illumination, and what you'll get is you can create lighting, okay? Now this we really don't want to go too far with. We can talk about it when we start rendering, but for now we want to keep off our self-illumination. The next one, and probably the second most important one, in addition to your generic tab, is going to be your bump map. Bump map is actually the texture shown. Okay, so we have the image of the texture, and then we have the relief, or the amount of noticeable feeling that you can have in the texture. So if you take this and we slide back and forth, you'll notice the degree of bump going into the negative or positive realm. So if you're at 0 bump, that means there's no texture. If you're at negative bump, it means everything that is solid black becomes very cut out or engraved. If you go positive, everything that's solid black is pushed up and all the white things are engraved. So this is a very simple tab that you can change to get a different relief, and you'll see later why that becomes more important. So let's just go back to a basic bump. Now, that's the basic understanding of the appearance editor. But usually within an appearance editor, you want to do more than just have a simple, basic, standard material. That's what everybody has that ever uses Inventor. So we need to increase and customize our textures. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to duplicate this texture and call it grip tape. And anytime you edit a material, you want to duplicate it. Because if you edit it, it will stay that way forever, even if you make a mistake. So we're going to go down here to the plus symbol, which means add a new material. And you can create from a template, right, if it's wood, water, paint, masonry, metal, or glazing, or whatever. But I'm just going to duplicate it because I found one I liked, and I just want to change some of the qualities about it. So we're going to go duplicate, and we're not going to save those edits that we did to our original one. And now you'll notice it says medium gray, medium pile, dark gray, 1. This is our opportunity to go ahead and rename this grip tape. And then you come into your information tab, we're going to call this grip tape. And then we do the same thing. We could keep our descriptions fine, we could change our grip to sandpaper, something like that. Those keywords are unimportant. Now more importantly, we want to come into the generic tab, we want to take a look at that texture editor. So click on that texture, and then what this is telling you is if you took basically a 15-inch square piece, this is how the texture gets added to 15 inches of your part. So here's where you want to make sure you correlate what the look and feel of your image will be, right? Let's say we're just going to use this existing one, and we're going to darken it down because we think that's going to be a little bit more appropriate to solid black grip tape. We can change our position, right? In the X and Y, this thing can move left and right. You could play with that later. We can also change whether or not it tiles, right? So tiling means it'll be copied over and over in multiple areas. And that's usually something you want to do. Unless you have one big wow graphic, you want to have this tile vertically and horizontally. If you want to change a portion of the size, you can change this to 5 inches, right? So for instance, with grip tape, I don't want it to look like carpet. I want it to be very dense. So I'm going to change this to like 5 inches and watch both change. Now you're not going to notice a big change here, but as you see up here, it's going to start to update and the texture is going to be more dense. And so I've made a few changes here. I've made it kind of dark, got my sample size a little smaller so the texture is a little smaller. You can change that to be not linked or linked. I usually keep it linked. And then we'll have it tile. So we like that. So we don't need to save anything here. It's automatically updating back and forth. So now we've updated the generic, but the key here is you need to update the bump map too. Every time you make one change to a map, a texture, you got to make that change all throughout. That's one thing it doesn't always keep up with. So we need to take our brightness back down, and we're going to change this back to 5 inches to update, make everything consistent, have it tile. We don't necessarily need to change the brightness because the bump map doesn't look at the image. It only uses the black through white scale, the gray scale. to create relief or pattern. So we'll go ahead and take that down, and we'll say apply. So now you'll notice we had grip tape over here, we've added a apply, and we're going to add some more texture. I'm going to really bump that relief up. So you'll notice with either direction we can look at that on a surface or an object, and you see that kind of grittiness, which looks like sandpaper. So we're going to say OK, and that's the first step. Just editing and duplicating basic materials with given texture maps. So if I hold Control, I can select all these surfaces and click grip tape. Now I get a nice little sandpapery looking texture. And you need to make sure when you make these changes that you're in realistic or shaded mode, right? Because if I go into realistic, look how much darker that texture shows up. That looks a lot like grip tape. Very nice. Now, the next thing we're going to do, since we've added a texture, we've named it, duplicated it, we're going to make our own texture. I'm going to make a graffiti graphic to the bottom of my skateboard. More specifically, this area right here. So to do that, we're going to pick a standard material. I usually pick default, right? We could take this default right here, and we're going to edit it, but we're going to go ahead and duplicate this material as a metallic paint. Let's do that. And so now we've duplicated it, we've made it a metallic paint, and what we might do, in fact, we might go back. Let's delete that. Let's delete this guy. Let's go in, edit this, and we want to just duplicate a generic material. So we're going to hit duplicate, and we're going to call this graffiti decal, right? Because this is like a sticker that we're going to put on the bottom of the skateboard. Okay, so notice we get our typical menu, right? We've got our object. We can make this a canvas, right? It'll be gray because we're going to make just an image. And here's where you start plugging in and making your own kind of stuff. So we're going to go to image. Now I don't have an image already selected, so I'm going to need to go online, right? Just like I might have right here. I'm going to find a graffiti pattern that I'd like to copy around. So let's just go with something simple. And we'll pick one of these graffiti backgrounds. You also want to consider the size of the image that you're going to go with, because it'll be important that you have a decent resolution. Let's see if I can get these to show up. Alright, so I've found an image here that I like. Be careful when you pick these images that you avoid watermarks or any clear lines around the side, so always try to find a good large image that doesn't seem like it looks like a small grid or something like that. So we're going to go and we're going to right click, we're going to save this image, and you should save it to somewhere where you can keep up with it, usually your documents or your pictures. We're going to call this graffiti background. We'll hit save. Oops. Now what we're going to do is we're going to load in that image we just saved from my documents or pictures. So I'm going to pick my graffiti background, say open, and you'll notice it already previews my graffiti background. But let's go ahead, click on our texture here, because we want to make sure we've portioned this right. Right now I have a 12-inch by 12-inch portion of this graffiti background, and we can make that larger, smaller, depending on what you like. I'm just going to stick with this for now because we want to experiment and see what it looks like first. So I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to add that texture, the graffiti decal, to these surfaces. So we're going to hit Control. I'm going to say OK here first. We have our graffiti decal showing over here, and we're going to click on there. And if you notice, we got a nice looking skateboard with a logo, right? You could even come back later and add another texture with your name or imprint into it to create some finish. So we could go there, we could keep it like that, or if you really wanted to add some extra layer of detail, we could come back in our texture and we could start editing this texture to be smaller or larger. Come back in our sample size, and we could make this 6 inches. And watch it how it changes. It gets even smaller. Or we could make it 20 inches. And then it becomes a giant text, right, or giant graffiti. So that's one thing. And if you want to create texture to it, we can come back and we can add our graffiti background to the bump map again. Right, we have our image here. We're going to come up here to brightness, and we can change that if we'd like. We're going to turn our sample size to the same thing. You want your sample sizes to be the same, always. And then we're going to add some bump to that. Now if you notice, as I'm adding this bump, it's really popping out some of that grittiness of the graffiti. But this may be a thing you do or don't want with your pattern. I don't necessarily want it, so I'm going to turn off the bump. But if you want nice textures, you will turn that on. So we're going to turn on reflectivity though, because I want like a nice slick paint job, right? So it kind of gets a little reflection. But I don't want it to be, let me play with some of these just to get some desired look. Say okay. And let's turn this to realistic. Oh, we got it on realistic. And we can take a look and see how to change our texture. So that's one way to add a nice texture to anything you do to customize it so it doesn't look like some standard Inventor object. Each time you mess with these textures, please continue and save. Always save your work, because it might close or crap out depending on how you type in the dimensions. So make sure you're careful with that. Alright, good luck making custom materials.